Today, I'm finishing up the build series on this 2021 Mazda CX-5 that got blasted in the front end. In today's video, our replacement structural panels will get welded in, damaged door will get metal worked and fixed, everything will get painted, and the car will get fully reassembled. In the previous video, I got this car mounted on my homemade frame rack so I could pull back both of the frame rails as well as a passenger side strut tower back into their original location. After which I started drilling out and removing all of the mangled up, distressed body panels and then started placing the new replacement panels back in their place. After that, with the use of a laser, I made sure that my replacement parts were set in place just right in comparison to the undamaged side. And the beauty of using a laser is, I know that I can get my parts into position just right every single time, down to a millimeter. Move panels to position according to laser.
The beam is a little faint, but you guys can see it.
And everything is coming back together nicely according to the factory specifications. Lastly, before I did any kind of welding, I temporarily secured all of the replacement panels into place with some metal screws. This way I can assemble the front end to make sure that all of my gaps are looking good and that all of the panels are fitting the way they're supposed to, while once again using the laser to make sure that I've achieved that uniformity with the fitment of the panels, both fenders and the hood. If you want to check out that previous video or any of my other videos for that matter, once you're done watching this video, go ahead and click on my avatar. Then click on videos, and that will take you to the list of all of the videos on my channel. Go ahead and check them out, and I bet you will find something interesting in just about every one of those videos. Another thing that I addressed at the end of last episode was the leading edge of the door that got bent up during an accident. I had to bring it back down to match it up with the edge of the fender before I can go any further with the repair of this door.
Now I am flush for most part. Obviously that edge will need more work and I still gotta work this crease. But all in all, at least now I can open the door without nicking the fender.
As you can see here, my replacement hood and passenger side fender are already painted. About a week or so ago, the weather was not too hot, not too cold, but just right. So I figured it's a good day to paint. It also happened to be the day that I received my brand new paint gun in the mail, so I was anxious to test it out. I've been rocking this Iwata LPH 400 for many years, and this thing's a soldier. It had never let me down. But I've been hearing a lot of good things about this Iwata Kiwami 4, and it is relatively inexpensive, so I figured I would give it a go. Iwatas are awesome paint guns. They are made in Japan, so you know the quality is going to be good. This gun has a nice premium feel, the trigger feels nice and smooth, and this thing lays paint down like a champ. The reason I know this is because I've been using the same gun at work for the past couple of months. I was really impressed with the way this thing performed. It lays the sealer, base coat, and clear down so well. And another thing that I've noticed is that this gun is faster than my LPH 400. Even though both guns have a tip size of 1.3, this Kiwami 4 lays the material quite a bit faster than the LPH 400. That means that I can move faster as I'm painting, therefore I can get through my paint jobs much quicker than I could with my old gun. And that is why I absolutely had to have one. If you want to get one of these, I will leave a link to it in the video description down below. On the day that I was painting, I first had to prep my replacement hood and a fender, and the best way to do this is by using a final sand paste along with a Scotch-Brite. Final sand is a paste that has some grit to it, so it serves two functions at the same time. It will clean the surface free of dirt, oil, and other contaminants, and at the same time the surface will get lightly scuffed up so that the paint has something to grab and hold onto.
I've had quite a few people ask me, how do you get such a clean paint jobs even though you're painting outside? You don't end up with a lot of dirt or bugs in your finish. First thing first, you don't ever want to paint when it's windy or even breezy outside. Usually in the mornings, there's quite a bit more moisture on the ground, whether it's on your grass or even on the ground, and a lot of moisture will trap the dirt that tries to tumble its way into your work area. Also, bugs usually come out in the afternoon and in the evening. That's when they're most active, and morning is really when most of the bugs are not around. So if there's less bugs in the air, there's much lesser chance of them getting their way into your paint. It's around 9 o'clock in the morning, and you know, it's mostly overcast with a lot of sun breaks. And since it is morning, it is much cooler outside, and you are much better spraying in a cooler environment than in the warm and hot. And one more thing, since I am painting in the area next to these tall trees, I don't want a chance of anything coming down off these trees and landing in my work area. So I am gonna put a tent right over the panels that I'm about to paint. Another advantage of having tent above your work area is if you have direct sunlight hitting the panel that you're about to paint, that panel is going to get warm, and then the material that you will lay down will not have enough time to flow out. It'll set up almost right away, and it's not going to look great. Therefore, if you're painting outside and it's sunny, you absolutely have to have a tent above you, or you have to be in some sort of a shade. There's one thing that I used to have an issue with a while back. After I would paint my front end parts, sometime down the road, these rock chips would start appearing on my front bumper cover, the leading edge of the hood, and also leading edges of the fenders. For the longest time, I could not figure out what was the cause of it, and I've been wrecking my brain trying to figure out how I can remedy the situation, and in the end, the answer came in a form of sealer. I'm using this Luma-based sealer. This is the stuff that's available to me locally, and it works out great, so this is why I stuck with this brand. This stuff comes in black, gray, and also there's white sealer.
And a good thing about that is I can mix and match these different color sealers to get it as close to the shade of the base coat that I'm gonna spray over the sealer, because base coat is semi-transparent, and the closer the color of the sealer is to the base coat that I'm gonna put over it, the less paint it will take to get that good coverage, and it's also going to make it easier to achieve a better paint match. To set up this gun, all you gotta do is just turn this bottom knob counterclockwise until it stops. Then you do the same thing with the knob at the very top. Next, you depress the trigger and turn this copper colored knob clockwise until it starts meeting some resistance, and then you're done. To spray sealer, I normally set my air pressure right around 30 to 31 psi, so about the same pressure as I would normally use to spray out the clear coat. I normally start out by laying down one coat of sealer over the leading edges of the front end panels, and then I give it about 15 minutes or so to flash off, after which I come back to do one more coat of sealer over the entire panel. Next, 2 coats of base coat and 2 coats of clear coat goes down, resulting in nice, glossy, even finish. It's been about 20 minutes since the last coat of clear went down. At this point, it is safe for me to move the canopy out of the way so both panels could bake out in the sun to speed up the paint curing process. And guys, I am really digging this paint gun. I would have to say that this was definitely money well spent. Next step was to address the door damage.
Alright, so after I bent out this leading edge, if you look, it's pretty flush with the fender. Yeah, there's some areas that still need a little more work, but the main thing is the gap here is just way too big, as you can tell.
And this dip in the door skin is also pretty sizable. That means that I have to pull the leading edge of the door forward to close up the gap between the door and the fender, and that also should help with tightening up that door skin.
To pull out the edge of the door, I'm gonna use this clamp. This clamp offers a nice wide grip, and also the teeth aren't super aggressive, not like some of the other clamps that I have.
But they are aggressive enough to chew up that edge of the backside of the door. And that area will definitely be visible once the door is opened, so in order not to disturb the backside of the door too much, I placed a paint stick over that area to act as a buffer between the clamp teeth and the area not to be disturbed. Then I positioned the frame rack tower in the direction of the pool. The very first attempt did yield some results, although not much, since the metal sprung right back once I released the frame rack. On the second pull, I moved the clamp a bit higher up on the door, and while the chain was nice and tight, I decided to take some tension off the door skin by raising all of that metal that's down in that dip, and for a task such as this one, there is no better tool than a spotter. In the repair area right next to the clamp, where there was just no room for the orange base of my spotter puller, I really had to use some elbow grease to manually bring up all of that metal that was down in that dip, and after just a couple of minutes of work, this edge of the door is really starting to take shape. I know I still got some more work to do right up top, and there's also some damage left down below. So I stripped the paint away in the areas to be worked next. And now I can go back to using my puller handle with orange base. That gives me much more leverage and control over the metal that I'm working, and that in turn makes this task much easier. I built this spotter out of some microwave transformers about 4 or 5 years ago, and it has totally revolutionized my workflow. Before this tool, metalwork was something that I dreaded. For me, it used to be a long, difficult, drawn-out, and complicated task. Therefore, I absolutely hated it. But after I built my spotter, it totally changed the whole metalworking game for me. I was able to hone my metalworking skills, and it quickly became something that I absolutely enjoyed doing. It's almost therapeutic.
So after making few pulls and then also raising all of this low areas up, this is the gap I got. It's uniform all the way down.
And after fine-tuning the door skin with the spotter just a bit more, I am pretty happy with the way things are turning out. At this point, I'm done with all of the metal work, and next step is body filler. I generally use some 40 or 80 grit sandpaper on an orbital sander to strip off all of the paint in the area where the body filler is going to be applied. There's a lot of cheap body filler out there, and most of it is garbage. You do get what you pay for, but does it work? Yeah, sure it does. And by garbage, I mean that stuff is not very smooth, so it doesn't spread onto the panel very easily, and it also sands like concrete, meaning that stuff is rock hard and it takes forever to sand it all down. Nice, creamy, easy to spread, and easy to sand down body filler can easily set you back $100 for a gallon. And through my own trial and error, I found a brand that I've been using with great results for a while now. It performs just as well as the expensive stuff at half of the cost. If you guys are interested, I will leave a link to it in the video description down below. Once the first coat of body filler gets sanded down, it reveals some high spots here and there. One way to lightly knock them down would be to use a center punch, but if you don't have one, not a problem. You can also come in with a stubby Phillips head screwdriver coupled with a hammer and lightly tap the screwdriver down while moving around the high spot. I'm not really looking to hammer down all of that metal just to create another low spot, so instead with some light tapping I'm moving all over the place as I gently massage that high spot slightly downward. And once I'm happy with the way everything feels, I'm ready for my second coat of body filler. Oh, what's going on here? Why is the door off the car? Well, my back is not as great as it once was, and hunching over when sanding on the door while it's mounted on the car in vertical position isn't the easiest thing, and it certainly doesn't do any favors for my back. Therefore, it is much easier to work on something like that when it's laid out horizontally. So after about 20 minutes of sanding, this is the final result, and everything feels great, really nice and straight. So now the next thing I gotta do is all of these heavier scratches that are left over from my 180 grit paper, I'm gonna go ahead and knock them down and go a little bit past that with some 320 grit paper on a DA, and that will get this area ready for primer. I generally go about 6 inches or so past the area where all of my sandpaper scratches ended, because primer is basically a thin coat of spray-on body filler and is being used to cover up some of the sandpaper scratches along with blending out your body work a little bit further out onto the panel. I quickly masked off all of the areas where I did not want any primer overspray. And since I'm about to primer the door, I'm also going to primer these areas on a driver's side fender that I already repaired off camera. My primer of choice also happens to be by Lumabase brand, just like my sealer. It's available to me locally, it's inexpensive, and it performs well. Gun of choice for this task is this Harbor Freight $15 special that I actually did a review video on some time ago. I used it to paint a fender and a door on the Swan car that I fixed a while back, and let me tell you, with this gun you do get what you pay for. It just didn't atomize the base coat or clear coat well enough, and results kinda speak for themselves. The finish that I ended up with was definitely less than stellar, although some people commented on that video by saying that their experience with this gun was good, and I'm happy for them. But that simply wasn't my experience. Therefore, this gun was demoted to being used for primer only. So the primer's been sitting on the shelf for a while, and a lot of the solids have settled down at the bottom of the can. So before I pour any of the primer into a mixing cup, I gotta make sure that the insides of the can are thoroughly mixed and agitated, and the best way to do that would be to use one of these mixing lids. Another reason why I love using these lids is because they make pouring out of the can so much easier and more precise, and also they don't really leave any mess behind. I mix the primer 4-to-1, meaning 4 parts of a primer will mix to 1 part of the activator. This is a high build primer, meaning that this stuff is pretty thick. Purple gun that I'm using has a tip size of 1.4mm, and this size works fine for sealer, base, and clear, but this orifice in the center is just way too small and restrictive for high build primer. Therefore, I had to modify this gun. My drill bit set has a nifty size chart in the back, and according to the chart, 5/64 drill bit equals to 2mm, and 1.8 to 2mm tip size is within range for use with high build primer. So let's go ahead and open up this gun tip to 2.0. It's not very apparent from the video, but this tip just increased in size by 0.6 of a millimeter. Last step before any of the primer goes down, I clean the area with some wax and grease remover to ensure the best primer adhesion to the panel. If you didn't know, primer does shrink, and that's why it's important to do your bodywork good, so this way you're not relying on a thick coat of primer to fix a lot of that shoddy bodywork. I always lay down just one thin coat of primer, and after it cures, most of it gets sanded down anyways, so this way whatever is left on the panel will have minimum amount of shrinkage. And the fender that I fixed off camera also gets one light coat of primer over both repaired areas, followed up by some black primer out of a can that's being used as a guide coat. About 24 hours later, with the use of some 600 grit sandpaper on a rubber block, I blocked out my primered area until all of the guide coat was gone and the panel felt nice and straight. Then once again, I used some final sand to get the rest of the door scuffed up and cleaned to receive some paint. Cleanliness is extremely important when it comes to painting, so there's no such thing as too much cleaning, so the last cleaning step is always with some wax and grease remover. And any of the raw plastic panels will get a couple of light coats of some adhesion promoter. All of the primer on the door gets covered with one medium wet coat of sealer. Take a note of how I'm spraying the sealer toward the front part of the door. This way, I'm directing the overspray away from the rest of the panel. First coat of base goes directly over the sealer. Second coat covers the first coat and goes past it by about 6 or 8 inches out into your blend area, and I lightly fan out my third and final blend coat another 6 to 8 inches onto the panel. I know I already said it, but I'll say it again, I'm really digging this paint gun. It just makes painting so effortless. So if you are a professional painter, maybe you've only painted a few times in your life, or you've never even held a paint gun in your hand, but you have a paint project that you wanted to tackle yourself, if there was one paint gun that I would recommend, then this would be it. Good paint gun is not gonna make you into a good painter, but I feel that it will help you shorten the learning curve, and you'll get better at painting sooner because you're not gonna fight the gun to get better results, and it will also save you a ton of frustration in the process. By next day, the paint was dry, so I went ahead and threw the door back on the car, after which I jumped onto getting the replacement structural parts as well as the chassis of the vehicle ready to accept some spot welds by grinding down all of the original primer and paint. And here I'm going to reuse the original spot weld locations to make the end result look as OEM as possible. So all of the areas that got prepped are basically just bare metal, and since I don't want any of it rusting, I'm going to give it a coat of some of the weld through primer. Since I already had these panels screwed in with some self-tapping screws, I'm using same hole alignment to put them back on. Resistance spot welder makes a job such as this one almost too easy. Welding tongues squeeze two panels against each other nice and tight and quickly weld them together, and it does it in such a way that imitates factory spot weld. Once the panel is secured in place with few spot welds, at this point it's safe to remove the screws, and now I can just go back and spot weld right over the screw holes and everywhere in between. There are going to be some areas where I just cannot get behind the panel with the spot welder tongues, so I have no other choice but use the MIG welder. Once one panel is fully secured in place, the next panel follows. With this tool, it takes me way less time to get all of my welding done compared to a MIG welder. The front and the very last panel goes in next, and since this panel has a little bit of a wiggle room before I weld it in, I want to be 100% sure that it sits exactly where it's supposed to with the use of measuring tape and a laser. In this instance, the laser is hitting the very top of that oval opening, and the masking tape is just making it a little easier for you guys to see. So if we compare the replacement panel to the other undamaged side of the vehicle, the laser is hitting the same exact spot down to a millimeter. So this way, I'm not guessing, but I know for a fact that positioning of my replacement panel is spot on. Therefore, once I reassemble the front end of the car, I know that all of my outer panels will line right up because I always triple check all of my measurements so that there are no surprises down the road. With a spot welder, there's virtually no cleanup afterwards. Certainly not like there would be if I used a MIG welder to get all of this welded up. And all I really gotta do now is just scuff up the areas where the welds are, to clean up and lightly scuff up the surface so it could accept some seam sealer, primer, and paint. If you guys are interested, I'm gonna have links to most of the tools and materials that I've used in this video in the video description down below. This is just basic rattle can primer over all of the bare metal. I let the primer set up for about 15 or 20 minutes, and then I followed up with the same base coat that I used on all of my outer panels. And to clear all of that, I'm gonna use this cheap clear in a can. When this cheap clear dries, it doesn't look very glossy, but that's exactly the look that I'm going for under the hood. I'm not really sure what the deal is, but most of the newer cars either have no clear in the engine bay, or whatever clear they use has very little gloss to it. Therefore, I can achieve almost a perfect match by using this garbage rattle can clear. At this point, everything is done and painted. For me, this is by far the most exciting part of the whole build because after I reassemble the front end, this build is basically done. And this is a moment of truth when we finally find out how well all of our panels are going to mash together. Starting out with our undamaged side, we got a good gap here, followed up by a good consistent gap between the fender and the hood. Our previously damaged side got a good consistent gap between the fender and the door. Hood to fender gap on this side also looks good. Bumper cover to fender connection looks correct. Hood to bumper gap looks nice and even from side to side, and the bumper cover to fender connection on the driver's side also looks great. Everything seems to check out. Couple of days later, I had my glass guy come out so he can replace the windshield, and after a little more assembly and giving a car a quick wash, this is the final product.